Want us to mute?
No, I don't want you to mute. I want everybody live and active.
You want us to talk? So we should all talk over the top of each other?
Yes,
what you're
please.
after?
Oh,
That's the
my
best
goodness.
podcast ever, where everyone is talking at the same time. It's my favorite.
I don't know, Jeff, if you want some of us to be unmuted. It could be dangerous, right?
No, I want you all unmuted. Everybody out.
Yeah.
Okay, let's do this. Let's go around and I want you to say your name and what you're working on right now, just for fun. And I'll start. I'm Jeff, and I'm currently re-editing 2 books, which is fun and kind of sad to see like how my writing was 6 years ago as opposed to now. It's a heartbreaking process. Like, oh,
So Jeff Elkins, I'm going to need to give yourself some grace, because where you were then was where you were, and where you are now is where you are.
Oh, thank you so much.
Growth.
Celebrate how far you've come.
No, that's a much more positive way to look at that. I will accept that this morning and take that in. Yeah. All right, somebody else go. Give us your name and what you're working on.
Okay, I'll go next. My name is Sully, and I'm currently working on my first like published fiction book, sci-fi book with a co-author, Jim Kukral. And so you want to know what we think about this dialogue only, is that right?
Yeah, we'll get there. We got to introduce ourselves first, because everybody needs to know voices.
Oh, yep, that's mine.
Yeah, awesome. Anybody else?
I'm Doug. I am working on a middle grade science fiction adventure series that I'm going to produce as a podcast. I had one story done, but I'm reworking it using all these cool dialogue things. And it seems to be going well. And I'm working on some story beats for a third one. Thinking maybe I'll use that for some of the challenges we're doing in this course.
Awesome.
Okay. I'll go next. My name is Alicia McCalla, and I write science fiction and fantasy stories for readers who want protagonists of color. I am currently working on my long fiction is superhero series called Heroes League Legacy. And then I have a series of short stories that I generally work on each month. And the current one, my current short story, I'm working on a fractured fairy tale of a dark fairy justice princess who has to get married and chops off heads.
I love
For the honeymoon, right?
Yes. She's a monster hunter.
If that didn't win Pitch Wars, nothing will. All right, Faye, introduce yourself.
Okay, I'll go. I'm Faye, and I am an aspiring writer. I'm working on what I would call my Phoenix draft of something I wrote about 2 years ago, and have had to start over from scratch, but I'm optimistic that it's going better these days. I write fantasy because you can't kill people in real life.
Nice. Perfect. Laura, we're gonna save Lon for last. Laura?
Laura Hum. I use she, her pronouns, and I am currently waiting for someone to give me something to edit.
Oh, yeah, that's my
while I put off writing 2 papers for school. So
I feel like somebody was just called out.
Yeah,
I wasn't directing it specifically at Jeff.
Yeah, that was really subtle.
Mute, Jeff. You need to mute us. You can't have all this.
That's right. I've changed my mind.
I think you have the power to mute me.
Who invited Laura to this call? I'm just kidding. We bring Laura to the call because she brings all the wisdom. All right. And saving the best for last, Lon.
Hi, my name is Lon Varnadore. I do science fiction and fantasy, currently working on a space opera series and the first one is called Chain of Starlights, and awesome. Really enjoying this class.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks. So I feel like it's funny. I don't, we've mentioned the class, where I feel like we're all taking the class together, because I'm learning a ton, which is fantastic. And one of the things we've been talking about is a dialogue only first draft, and I think most of us have practiced it. So I'm going to describe what it is real
Not
quick.
me, Jeff. Not me. No.
But you will. But you will.
Now he's calling people
You need
out.
to just mute me. Just mute me
No.
already.
No, I'm going to make you explain why you haven't, what the fears are.
Okay.
Because I think it does expose some fears, right? Like, it is scary. So first, let's talk about what it is real quick. So dialogue only first draft is where you write your first draft and you literally only write dialogue between characters. If you have more than 2 characters, I even recommend just using their initials. So like your draft will look like, if I was writing a conversation between, Billy, Sarah, and Chris, I'd have like a B colon and then what Billy says, and then like a C colon what Chris says, and then like an S colon what Sarah says, like a B colon what Billy says, and like so it creates this first draft where you're literally just focusing on the character voices and what they're saying and driving that plot of the scene through the characters. So once you have that first draft done, and then sometimes you'll have to put in like little sentences like Billy pulls out his lightsaber and threatens Sarah, and then you go back, but then you go directly back into dialogue, right? Like, so you're trying to keep as much of it as dialogue as possible, and then after you've done your first draft, it's a great opportunity to like look at your voices, make sure your voices are all different and that they are all consistent with the character. So and then checking kind of the emotional flow, making sure the voices feel like you want them to feel, like they're modulating in the right way based on the tensions between the characters. And then after you've done that kind of scan, then you can go back in and put in all the little extra bits, right? Like the scene setting paragraph that you're going to need probably somewhere near the first. That's like, they all walk into the bar. Billy, Sarah, and Chris walk into a bar, right? Like, and then the like, physical actions. Thank you for laughing.
What are they doing? You can't just say that and don't tell us what they're doing.
But I don't have a punchline to finish the joke.
It's a punchline.
Billy, Sarah, and Chris walk into the bar, and Chris says, "Ow." So then you put in all the extra bits. That's like their physical body motions and like the paragraphs around that. I like to do it scene by scene, right? Like so that I do a dialogue only scene, and then I'll immediately come back and put in the extra bits. I do know authors who like to do the whole book dialogue only, and then they have kind of like a screenplay, and then they come back and rewrite the screenplay as a novel. So all right, so the first thing I want to talk about with y'all is who the ones of us who have tried it. What are your initial impressions of it? What do you think?
I'll go first because I was thinking about this when you announced we are going to do this meeting this morning, and I went back to a short story I wrote about a year ago, and I think I inadvertently wrote like the first 2/3 dialogue heavy without even realizing it.
Nice.
And I think it was because of the actual circumstance that the characters find them in. It just kind of lent itself to a lot of dialogue up front. And I was just going over it this morning, and I'll probably add a little bit to it because I can see now after taking this class for a few weeks where I can improve that. But the other half of that is that I never really thought about it until I first heard about it from Jay in one of his podcasts. But I have a really thick skull, so it took me a few months to like realize that I probably need to try this. And then when I did, I could immediately see how it improved not just the dialogue, but the overall storytelling as a side effect, as a byproduct.
Awesome.
And I think that's just like this one of the coolest things ever.
That's great. Anybody else?
I think it's sorry. You want to go?
Go for it.
Okay. I thought it is a little scary at first because I'm someone who likes to just try to say what's going on and describe everything. So it was a little harder for me to do that. But at the same time, it is interesting, and I do actually like doing the dialogue as well, and just going through and doing a dialogue scene only, then going back and putting in other bits and pieces. So.
Nice. So talk to me about, I know, Alicia said that she hasn't written one yet because she's scared of it. What about doing a dialogue only draft is scary?
Oh, you want me to start? Because
anybody, but yes,
you need to change the course title to me to Dialogue Therapy for Alicia. Because I feel like I need therapy sessions. It's like, you want me to do what, Jeff? And I'm looking at the lessons like, no, I can't do it. It's like, what? Because I am so used to, so my natural inclination is action and narration. So I'm literally the opposite of you, right? Mm-hmm. Even in our process. So even when I start pantsing and laying things out, I just don't think about dialogue naturally. And I always add my dialogue in the reverse in the editing phase. So I will get all of it out and then go back and add dialogue. Hence, sometimes my stories, they don't read as fast, or sometimes they could get weighed down. And so I'm personally really interested in a dialogue only draft to see if that helps the read get better, or the readability of my story.
Are you a big plotter? Do you plot your books out first?
So right now I am learning to plot.
Okay.
And a friend of mine, who's a writer friend, she's pretty successful in what she does. She says, you're naturally a plotter. I don't even know why you were ever pantsing, because I need to know what's going on. And so, yeah.
I find that like writing prose first for me comes when I'm focusing on plot points. That like, I think for me, there's a natural fear with dialogue that I'm going to ramble. So that like, I think so prose, like scenery and like action moments tend to be for me like a security blanket of like, if I can hold on to this security blanket, I know I can force the plot forward. Right. Like the problem I have is that when I don't do dialogue first, I end up getting these long sections of paragraphs, as Laura can probably attest to, that everybody just wants to skim, right? Like people just skim them. They don't read them because there's not a lot of emotional engagement in those long proses, right? Like because the emotional engagement comes from that attachment to characters. So I know that's what has always scared me about it, is that I sit down to write a dialogue only scene and my first fear is like, how in the world am I ever going to get the plot to move with people talking? I have found that the fear for me anyway is a little irrational, because the plot actually moves better when I'm using dialogue, because it forces me to like push the characters to speak the plot moves into action, if that makes sense.
So just listening to you personally, I would say that not only do I have fear, but I also have a belief problem. So I really believe in head chopping and action, right? I really do. I really like it. And it's fun to me. Like I look at a scene and go, how many times can I bring out my sword and chop somebody's head off?
So
that's not story exactly, but I think I believe that the action is, is what's most important over the discussion between characters.
You sound like a Marine or something.
I am a Marine. Literally, I am a Marine Corps veteran.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, I like violence in my stories. That is a problem. Hence, I'm in dialogue trying to get therapy, because I'm like, I got to stop all the head chopping and put something else in there.
I think
you write the kind of books that I love to read. I don't know why I don't have my hands on one of your books yet. But as a reader, the utterances that happen in the middle of a fight allow me as the reader to remain connected to the characters in a different way than if I'm just watching them. So that fear of, so, you know, kind of think about what happens in a moment when you're fearful or when someone startles you. Most people aren't silent in those moments, which is a little bit ironic because when I am afraid, I actually can't speak. So it's a little bit of irony there. But I know that, like, you know, the way people respond in their fear reactions or their nervousness is they have a tendency to use their voice. So I would just encourage you to kind of think about what happens in those moments. And sometimes that internal dialogue that we have, like when we're pushing ourselves or we're trying really hard, I imagine as a Marine, you had a lot of experiences pushing yourself physically, and kind of that internal dialogue you had with yourself about, I can do this, I can do this, I know I can do this. Like that kind of utterance helps a reader really connect with the characters. And Jeff made a joke earlier about me like cutting long paragraphs in his books when I edit. And the reason that I do that is because as a reader, I actually never read those. I am a super, super lazy reader. I have no qualms admitting that. Sometimes I will only read half of a book just so I can keep the plot line and the dialogue moving. But when there's dialogue, I find it much, much harder to skip over a section, even if it's just one small line in the middle of a long paragraph, because it engages me, it draws me back in. So I would just encourage you to maybe think about those kinds of action scenes a little bit differently, instead of thinking of them as I can't put dialogue there because I need to keep things moving. Just kind of think about it as, if I add some here, people are going to continue moving forward with my story and connect with my characters.
That is very helpful. Thank you.
And go for it, Faye.
So I was initially really resistant to trying dialogue only. It's scary, and I see pictures in my head. That's how I see my stories. So writing down what I see in my head was really easy. So this was much harder. And you know what? It's actually a really great way to get to know your characters. It's amazing how powerful it is to just listen to what they say, and then you don't have to do as much work to try and get to know them.
Yeah, it really forces them front and center. It puts your characters at the center of the piece, which I think is
So just one of my observations, and I don't want to take over, but in the first couple of lessons that you had in the dialogue course, characterization was huge, which is something I just generally don't do. And so it took me a while to kind of deal with characterization. And I think that might be another one of my fears personally, is that if you're not strong in characterization, or even the lesson that you have on modulating the different voices, that might be a fear too, of how do you engage with your characters if you don't really know who they are and what their voices sound like.
Yeah, and it's a weird thing. Like, I think I realized that as a writer, from my first 5 years of writing stories, that I was really obsessed with plot. And I think the reason we're also, this is my theory anyway, the reason we're also obsessed with plot is because the write fast, publish fast mantra has been so prevalent in the indie author world for so long, right? Like a book a month, like get those things out, hit the genre points and keep moving, right? Like, you know, inciting incident, like the 5 steps of the story grid formula. And the whole point is to like crank out this thing that meets the genre and then put it in the world. That like we've all kind of forgotten that, well, at least I know I've forgotten that what really connects with the reader is the emotional journey of the character, right? Like before we got all plot obsessed, we were all obsessed with the hero's journey because it's that hero that the reader connects with and wants to follow through the thing, especially as we move into this like audio centric world where everybody's watching and listening to media, and very few people are, like less and less people are actually sitting and digesting a book. right? Like even some of the most prolific authors I know will be like, well, I read this book, and then later they'll be like, by read, I mean, I listened to it, right? Like, so there's that, like, even some of us are like, those of us that like quote unquote read the most are actually digesting what we read through listening to it. And it's the character voices that are going to drive that engagement with the reader. So I find writing that dialogue only first draft forces me to put those characters back front and center. And I think to answer your concern, Alicia, like, I don't know my characters, how am I going to write a dialogue only first draft? You got to get to know them at some point, right? Like, so better early in the book than late, because if you get to know them on, you know, word 52,000, then you have a lot of editing to do, right? Like, so better to force yourself to get to know them. I think of it a little bit as speed dating, like forcing yourself to sit down across from a character and figure out who they are by writing their dialogue is, I think, another advantage of writing scenes this way. Yeah, Doug, you've been quiet. You got anything to add?
Yeah, I didn't want to jump in on top of anybody, but I think I mean, it's difficult to start any new work, right? It's difficult to start any new scene. It's always hard to get into whatever. So, I mean, so some of what I found hard is probably just hard no matter what you're doing. But I think the difference between doing dialogue first and writing is kind of the difference between being an observer and empathizing with the characters in there, because, you know, it's that whole empathy that lets you get in.
Powerful.
You know, if I can empathize with the 2 or 3 or, well, 12, I mean, it's hard to empathize with 12 all at once, but with the 2 or 3 people in a scene, you know, I begin to see it through their eyes. You know, the movie, you know, again, we all watch these movies in our heads as we're writing, right? And, or at least I do. And I assume when I think about other people writing, I see this movie of people watching movies in their head. But anyway, but the difference is where the camera is, right? You know, is my camera at a godlike view, just kind of watching, oh, there's those people poking around. And I like, you know, I do those kinds of things. It's all, you know, it's kind of like watching the difference between the old style video games where you're just kind of watching down and maneuvering pieces, and the first person shooter kinds of things, right? Where not, actually, I don't play those, but I watch my boys play them in the past, right? You know, where you're following over the shoulder of somebody, you know, so making that mindset shift is probably the hardest part. But once you get there, I think it flows better, it flows easier. And kind of like Faye was saying, it, you know, it comes more quickly, you know. And I don't know if that's true for everybody, but for me, once you get your head kind of looking in the right point of view, you know, the rest of it starts to flow better, you know. And again, I routinely, and this is not necessarily a good thing, right? You know, when you're thinking about some kind of personal conflict you've had, you know, we all do these conversations in our head, and you know, where you, rather than talk to the actual person, you know, we have these fake conversations in our head, and which is not, you know, I mean, practicing, I guess, is what it is. So, but the danger in that, and it's even writing, or the hard part of writing the dialogue only scene, is that it's the same thing that you have when you have it in your head. You're writing against these straw men, and as opposed to real people. And, you know, because, you know, the one person you want to say things, you know, so you kind of just toss in some fodder for the other ones that, you know, for him to shoot at, or whatever, for her to shoot at. And, you know, so one of the difficulties is making sure you accurately reflect what the other person's thinking and saying as you're going through, you know, it's kind of a head hopping problem. You know, you need to head hop a little bit. I mean, you don't want your story to head hop, but you want to do a little head hopping as you're bouncing in the dialogue back and forth. And that's a little hard to get right, I think. So.
Yeah, I love that. And I find that head hopping sounds intimidating. I actually find that as I do it, I don't know if y'all share this too, but I find as I do it, energy starts to build in the scene as I'm writing, and my writing actually moves a lot faster, right? Like if I'm not having to worry about like body motions and like location, and I can just put like a line in there that's like they change rooms, and then I can go right back into the dialogue, the first draft moves so much quicker, because it does start to feel like this game of hot potato where your characters are just throwing this potato back and forth, and everything just starts to like accelerate as I'm writing. And I don't get bogged up in like, because where I get caught is I get stuck in the like, how do I describe this scene, that like this setting in a creative way? Like what's the metaphor I can use, or the simile I can use, and like how am I gonna like, you know, have this cute turn of phrase that's like gonna sound fun? And I think as writers, I get stuck there. I get stuck in this like, I need to create in this paragraph this like beautiful description, whereas what the reader actually cares about is the engagement with the character. So like there's like this thing that bogs me down that I'm obsessed with as a writer, where when I write a dialogue only first draft, it pushes me past that thing and forces me to focus on what the reader's actually going to engage with and care about, which is the character movement. Like, I know I love those turns of phrase too. Like, you know, I think Mark Zukakis, who wrote the book Thief, is my favorite author I'm reading right now, that just does them brilliantly. Like his metaphors are so great, but I can get lost like 30 minutes trying to figure out how I want to explain this stupid, you know, how I want to explain the chair screech in the table. And it's like, what's the point? Like, you know, I can get the whole scene out and then I can come back and still spend that 30 minutes, but at least I've got the scene out, right? Like productivity wise, it's way more efficient to knock the whole scene out, create that energy between the characters, and not dwell on this one place that like exhausts me, wears me out, and runs my writing energy down. Right. Like, so for me, it's like it's like Doug was saying, that like hopping back and forth between characters is actually an energy builder for me, as opposed to like as opposed to trying to get each paragraph done and then getting worn out because I'm stuck on something and like quitting. Right. Like, so.
Yeah.
Jeff, I have a question. I'm sorry.
Go ahead. Doug, why don't you jump on for a thought, and then we'll come back to.
Sure. In my day job, I do software. One of the acronyms that floats around my kind of world is YAGNI, YAGNI. You ain't gonna need it. And I find that doing a dialogue only first draft helps with that, because, you know, we write so much that you don't need, and that your loving editor is just going to cut anyway. And as pointed out, but, you know, so writing it, you know, again, it keeps it lean, keeps, you know, you get keeps the main point. And then when you come back and read it and it reads a little too terse, you say, okay, here I do need some description. I do need to know what was in their mind when they had this conversation. I do need to know what's around them, but only what you need, not what you wanted to show. So
yeah, and that does happen. Like, I was writing a piece this morning, and I realized I got all the way through, and they're in this neighborhood, and I realized I never actually described what the neighborhood looked like. So I had to go back after I finished all the dialogue only and write a paragraph about like, here's what the scene is, because I got to the end and one of the characters was like reflecting on the neighborhood around them. And I was like, oh, I haven't actually told the reader where they are. So that does happen, right? Like, you got to go back and yeah. Alicia, you had a question?
Yes. So as I approach this, I do occasionally write first person point of view. So how does that affect a dialogue only draft?
That's a great question. So it depends how you treat the first person point of view inner thoughts, right? Like, if the first person is describing the scene a lot, where the first person's like, I see this and I see that and I see this and I see that, then I would leave all of that out and just focus on the interactions between the characters. If you have a first person narrative, so a lot of times a first person narrative will also have like a kind of a third person perspective on the scene. So like, a third person will describe the room, but then the POV is first person. Then I would go ahead and put all the first person stuff in, and then come back and put the extra stuff in later. Does that make sense? So like, I would have, you know, things like, I saw his face and blah, 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 blah. I might go ahead and write that in the dialogue only first draft, if you're not just describing settings and describing body actions and all that kind of stuff. Because the point is to get to the interactions between the characters. So, you know, but you're right, that first person voice is weird for a dialogue only first draft. to do it, I would say if you're doing it for the first time and you're starting out in your first person POV and you want to try dialogue only first draft, only write what the characters are speaking to each other. Only write what's coming out of their mouth verbally, and then go back and add the extra like first person perspective on the setting and the actions in the room and all of that as if it were a third person thing.
So let me make sure I understand. So are the internalizations that a character would say to themselves a part of the dialogue or not?
Again, it depends on how you're using those internalizations. So if those internalizations are comments, the first person characters making themselves, like, I can't believe they just said that, and man, that makes me feel awkward, then I would consider that more a conversation between the first person and the reader, and I would write those in a first person first draft. If the first person comments they're making themselves is they're describing the scene to the reader, then I would leave those out. So like I was reading what's her name, she wrote Big Magic and Eat, Pray, Love, Elizabeth something. Dang it, her name's gone. She had a novel recently. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, Elizabeth Gilbert. Thank you. She had a novel.
Really, you forgot that?
I did. I totally forgot Gilbert. She had a. Don't embarrass me, man. I get embarrassed. She had a novel recently, which name I also forgot, but you can go look it up. It's one of her most recent ones. Where she's talking about it's first person point of view of a girl that's like going to this theater troupe, and like I think it takes place in the 1930s. And I was reading that, and her first person character like will spend a paragraph or two describing the building to the reader, and it's written, the whole book's written like a letter, right? Where like the first person POV is just talking to the reader as if they're having a conversation. I would leave all, if I was writing a first person POV dialogue only first draft, man, that's a mouthful. I would leave all of that description stuff out. And I'd even though it's in voice to the reader, I'd leave it out and jump right to the character interactions to make sure those character interactions stay the focus of the piece.
Gotcha.
Because otherwise,
so basically, the internalizations that are internal comments, along with the other character communications. Gotcha. Okay.
Yep, that's what I would do. Now, I don't write first person POV. So y'all, you know, has anybody tried a dialogue only first person POV yet?
No, but the example that you and Lon gave me a couple weeks ago, Jim Butcher books do exactly what you're talking about, and he does it extremely well. Yeah. So Alicia, pick up a Jim Butcher book.
I read the Dresden Files.
Yeah.
He cuts a lot of heads.
He cuts a lot of heads. Of course, I love Dresden.
Yeah, so he does exactly what we're talking about right now.
I tend not to use Jim Butcher as my, trying to be like him, because he's just too damn good, and I'm just like, you're just not that good, right?
Yeah, but he's humble about it.
Yeah, and I think that's a great example of, like, I'm glad you brought that up, Sully, because that's a fantastic example of a genre-based fiction novel, right? Like, he kind of defined that urban fantasy genre-based fiction novel that is heavily plotted, right? Like, each of his books follows a very clear plot line, right? Like, you can kind of tell, like, on page such and such, Dresden's going to figure out what kind of spell or magic fix he needs to, like, solve the mystery that he's trying to solve. But is character driven and is voice driven, right? Like, every chapter in Dresden's books is an interaction between Dresden and someone else, right? Like, and even when Dresden's alone, Butcher gives him almost inanimate objects to play off of, like the skull in his basement, where, like, so he's alone in his basement making a spell, and now there's a talking skull down there, so they can, like, dialogue about the spell he's making, right? Like, it's rare to find Dresden alone.
Not an object, he's a person. What are you talking about?
He's a spirit. Yeah,
trapped in there. There's a real conversation going on.
Yeah, he's on loan from Mark Lefebvre.
But that's a great example of kind of a dialogue driven action book where like there isn't any action without Dresden talking, right? Like he's always talking you through the action, and a dialogue only first draft allows us to have that kind of feel where even in like heavy action scenes, our characters are talking through what's going on.
Okay, so now you convince me. If I do a dialogue only first draft, I could be like Jim Butcher.
That's right.
Yep.
That was my goal. I don't know if Jim Butcher does dialogue only first drafts. If he listens to this and wants to come on and talk about it, yeah.
You too
right.
can be like Jim Butcher.
You too can be like Jim Butcher. It's going to be the name of this podcast. All right. Anybody else have anything to add about dialogue only first drafts? Anything we haven't talked about yet?
I have a comment though. I was actually a little bit surprised to hear some of you say that you were afraid to try it. That actually didn't occur to me. So I'm wondering why, first of all. But I encourage you to go ahead and do it. Just take a piece you've already written and literally cut out everything but the dialogue and then line it up and then take a fresh look at it. I think that'll help you get started with it. If that helps.
That's a great intermediate step. Or sometimes if I want to play with it and I'm not ready to like invest real work time on it, like if I want to play with a technique, I'll just write a short piece. I'll be like, all right, I'm just going to write a conversation between two characters and I'll just like pick a random conflict, right? Like, so this is just like a good story exercise, like working on dialogue, so write a dialogue only first draft. Just a random, like I wrote one a couple months ago that was like, a man is leaving his house. Like he's packing up to like be separated from his wife and he's leaving his house and they're going to have their last conversation before he walks out the door. And so like, I didn't do any character plotting. I didn't do any voice plotting. I just started with that conflict. And then I was like, what does this conversation sound like? And, I hammered out like 3,000 words, just purely dialogue. It was a great exercise, right? Like had me think through that. But so if you're not ready to like take one of your stories and actually like invest time in it for like one of your books, because I know we all have, all of us have our own deadlines and our own, like, this is writing time. It has to be dedicated to finishing this chapter or finishing this book, right? Like just take an extra hour one night, pick a random conflict, right? Like somebody walked into a coffee house to order a muffin and the barista gave them a brownie, right? Like write it out, see what happens in your head. Just only dialogue.
Off with their heads, right, Alicia?
That's right.
So I was just thinking, I have something to say to Sully. I hear you out there, Air Force, telling the Marines to stop bashing things and be curious and explore. I hear that. I heard you, Sully. I heard you.
All right, that's good.
Okay, before this erupts into a military battle.
I know.
Of course I'm gonna win, right? I always win. Marines always win.
Yeah, and I'll let her think that.
Yeah, so couple of things. So I don't know how much of my background you all know. I don't write fiction. I write dialogue for simulations for training purposes. And for me, learning dialogue with no background as a writer, learning to write dialogue and the nuance in dialogue was terrifying, right? Like, so I feel what you all are feeling about like this nervousness of how can I do this character justice and put somebody new into the world that people are going to like and want to be with and spend time with and like connect to. It's a scary thing, but just, I would encourage you to be empowered that your readers are very generous, even lazy readers like me. I would much rather read a story that has a lot of characters, even if they have only one voice, than I would a prose only story, as Jeff can attest, because I don't read this paragraph and I tell him I don't read this paragraph. I would tell other writers that I don't read their paragraphs either, but I don't think they want to hear from me. So Jeff lets me tell him, but my point is like, trying it, even if you find that all of your characters' voices sound the same, even if all of your character voices sound like you, that's okay, right? Like, you don't have to know your character. Obviously, you're going to have to go back and edit, but even if you have your character and you have your character wheel, you're still going to have to go back and edit. Don't be afraid of the editing process. Just try it. You might find that you really like it, and you have a team of people around you who are going to come alongside of you and be like, hey, this is really great. I might make a recommendation here. I might make a recommendation here. Or, hey, your character feels like this. Is that what you're going for? But like, just getting started in it. Doug said earlier, like, starting anything is scary. Like, there's nothing worse than a blank page. For me, there's nothing worse than a blank database, because that's how we build our stories at work. Like, it's terrifying to get started, but once you get started, you kind of pick up that momentum, and the voice starts to evolve, and you start to really get to know your character. Kind of like what Jeff was talking about speed dating, which is really funny from the man who's been married for 2 decades.
Never been on a speed date.
So
Never.
some of us have been on speed dates, and they're terrifying.
Yeah. Horrible at dating in general.
Yes.
So, yeah.
But like, as you're like, when you get to know somebody, you don't know a lot about them at first. That's okay. But then the more time you spend with them, the more you get to know them, and allowing your readers to get to know your characters in the same way is a great thing. So even if you're starting and you don't know who your characters are, if you're like Alicia and you don't do a lot of like character development in the beginning, that's okay. Just write, even if the characters have your voice. So that's my only recommendation from a non-writer, writer/editor. So have fun with that.
So,
Can I piggyback on that?
Mhm.
So when I did that scene with Jeff, a couple 3 months ago, it was a huge benefit to write the scene and then take out all the stuff except for the dialogue, and then re-engage with the dialogue, keeping in mind what you wanted to get across to the reader. And we did a podcast on this, but I actually ended up cutting out like 500 words, and the story was better with more dialogue. So if you cut out the stuff where you can't see it on the page, all you see is dialogue, but you know what the surroundings are like, you can better write better dialogue.
Yeah, and you were writing science fiction, which I think is important to note, because there's a lot of like scene building and necessary descriptions in there that you really nailed with that piece. But yeah.
What I found helpful.
That is a question too about the science fiction and fantasy, because we would think that dialogue wouldn't be important there, but it is.
It's the most important. Yeah,
it is for me, because like Laura, I skip over big chunks of just nitnoid stuff.
I knew I wasn't the only one.
Yeah.
There's a team of us. Faye, you wanted to say something earlier.
Yeah, actually, confession. This week, I actually pulled a character from a TV show I'm watching, and she was one of the characters in my dialogue, because I was like, I didn't know what to do. So I actually pulled Margot from The Magicians is one of my characters in my piece this week.
Margot, I love Margot.
And so, yeah, I just put her in someone's head and just made them talk to each other, just to practice and to learn more about my character.
Yeah, it's great. And I got to say, like, a character, this is, just going back to like why dialogue is so important in science fiction and fantasy, right? Like the scenes of Margot that we remember, a character that is like a, hardcore head chopper, right? Like the scenes of Margot that are really touching are like the episode where she's alone in the desert in a tent, and she's having visions of Elliot, and they're like processing the trauma that she's been through, right? Like, yeah, she's fun and she's got, little fun quips, and there's a lot of action with Margot, but it's that moment of dialogue that makes you go, that elevates her character beyond just like the funny quips here and there. But, and talk about a show that's like a fantasy show that's dialogue driven, right? Like we love The Magicians because of the dialogue between the characters and like the relationship between the characters, because like the world of Magicians only like partially makes sense. So it's not like the magic scheming is like this amazing, you know, oh my gosh, the world building's incredible. But to go back to what Sully was saying, I think a lot of times as writers, we use that world building as a crutch. And we use that action building in those long proses of, you know, the dance of action between characters as a crutch. And you know, I think sometimes I do it. I'm not going to speak for everybody, but sometimes I do it because I'm afraid to emotionally engage with my own characters. I'm afraid to write the Margot Elliott scene in the tent because I know I'm going to feel something when I write it. So rather
But
than
it's so much fun to write the Margot who's the king, right?
It is, right? But even the Margot who's the king is all dialogue driven.
This is
Right?
Well,
Like, so
especially the Margot head chopping king.
yes, right?
but yeah, but it is
I told you to
fun.
put us on mute. You should have muted us, Jeff.
It is fun, but we gotta go deep with our characters. We gotta open ourselves up to the emotions they're feeling, and those emotions are only experienced through the words that are coming out of their mouth. Right.
Yep. And I think this course is taking, at least for me, it's taking each of those layers, you know, a piece at a time, a week at a time, and it's giving me time to process. So eventually I'll be able to write, you know, a really strong dialogue scene with all of these elements we've been learning about in mind as I go along.
Yeah, my whole, like, this sounds complex, but I promise the more you do it, the easier it gets, and it just becomes second nature, right? Like the characterizations and like the charts we talk about on this podcast and that we're working through in the course and the theory behind character voice and all that, it feels so like, oh my gosh, this is intense and complex. But after you've done it for a couple weeks, it just becomes second nature. You're like, yeah, I'm going to pull up in my character wheel. I'm going to look at the chart. I'm going to get the voice down, and then I'm going to go write my dialogue only draft. It's
Yep. It's kind of like field stripping an M16 in the dark.
I can do that.
Which
You
we-
see?
which we can all
Seriously, I
relate
can do
to.
that.
All of us can do that.
all right. On that note, I'm going to call it.
For those of us who have not served in the military, for those of you who did serve in the military, thank you for your service. But for those of us who didn't, the analogy we use at work is learning to drive a car. When you're 16 years old or you're teaching somebody to drive a car, you're teaching them, okay, you have to slow down, anticipate slowing down, take your foot off the gas, move it over to the brake, press the brake, press it gently, don't slam on it, press it gently. You're going to have to turn, think about when you're going to turn, where are the cars around you, put your blinker on, right? But then after you've been driving for a couple of months and then a lot of years, you don't even think about the act of driving. You can listen to the radio, you can eat, you can have a conversation, you can talk on your cell phone. Don't talk on your cell phone unless you're using hands-free.
You can text too if you're good.
Right. Don't do that. But like it just becomes part of what you know how to do. So for those of you who can field strip in the middle of the night in the dark,
You can. Multiple weapons, not just an M16.
Yeah. And that's actually not that hard. So
No, it's not actually.
So driving a car.
Okay, to wrap up, here's what I want to do. If you've got something in the world, a blog piece, a book, something you want people to go engage in, tell us real quick where they can find it and what it is.
They did. My Black Women Are Scary podcast just put out my last Vampire Hunter story as one of their dramatic reads, and it's really cool. So I'm going to do a blog post at aliciamccalla.com for everybody to click there and go listen.
Can you put that in Slack channel for us?
I shall.
Nice.
Thank you.
Love it. Anybody else?
Yeah, the series I'm working on that I hope to launch is going to be a podcast. The website's anotherstoryplease.com.
Nice.
If you're interested, you could follow up there. The website's a work in progress, but it is ready enough to get started. So
yeah, awesome. Anybody else?
Yeah, I've got a few books out. A series that I've been working on is Junker Blues. Lon.
Oh yeah, I love Junker Blues.
Lon Varnadore. It's on Amazon, and at the moment it's Amazon only. So
fantastic. Anybody else want to plug anything before we?
I have a couple of short stories at my website, toryelement.com, and the arc for the next book coming up.
Perfect. And I can testify. I have read everyone's work that's talking right now, and it's all fantastic. It's all absolutely worth your time. You should go check it out. All right. Anything else anybody wants to shout out?
Thanks for
Alicia,
having us. Yes.
Alicia, go ahead and when you get your practice scene dialogue only written, send it to me so I can gobble it up.
Oh boy. Okay.
Put it on
I
the
will
Slack
Air Force.
channel.
Yeah, put it on our Slack channel so we can all read it.
Yeah, so I can be embarrassed.
No, it's not embarrassing.
We challenge the Marine.
That's right.
Oh. Oh, no Marine Corps challenges here. Now I have to stand up and be simplified.
All right, I've turned off the recording.
Yeah, better add 50